Jim Davis, author of the world's most read comic strip, Garfield, might never have created America's favorite feline if he hadn't been afflicted with asthma as a young child. Often confined to his home in a time when asthma management was less understood, his only entertainment was a pencil, a paper, and his imagination.
I remember well my bouts with asthma as a child. I was diagnosed when I was 7 months old and continued to fight it until I was about 17. While I was having an attack, I couldn't go outside to play, so to entertain myself, I always liked to draw. Now, Mom encouraged my art. She always made sure I had a pencil and paper around at all times.
Mr. Davis's plight as a young child confined to his home to ride out the attack can be avoided today with proper asthma management. Organizations like AANMA, the Allergy and Asthma Network, Mothers of Asthmatics, instruct asthmatics on how, through knowledge and education, to overcome their disease, not just cope with it. Today is Asthma Awareness Day on Capitol Hill, where hundreds of senators and congressmen have declared that it's time to educate America that asthma is a life-threatening disease, but a disease that no one has to die from. U.S. Representative Patrick J. Kennedy is a lifelong sufferer from asthma.
I have the most chronic asthma you could ever have. I've been in the hospital more times than I can even count. The whole idea here is to get all of this message out. The truth is, we face an asthma crisis.
And we face this crisis partly because half of the states in the U.S. do not have laws protecting students' rights to possess and use prescribed life-saving medications during school.
When I was 14, Dad suggested I try out for the high school football team. Now, being a 100-pound asthmatic football player was a real character builder, and I had frequent attacks during practices and games before the first frost each season. But fortunately, the student manager always had my medicine nearby for relief. Allergy and Asthma Network Mothers of Asthmatics told me that not all kids have the right to carry life-protecting asthma and allergy medications to school. In fact, over 20 states did not have laws protecting student rights to possess and use prescribed life-saving inhaled or auto-injected medications. Now, I have to admit this came as quite a surprise. If I hadn't been able to get to my medications when I needed, well, I doubt I'd be here today talking to you. On behalf of the Allergy and Asthma Network, I urge lawmakers to take a look at the important legislation introduced by Congressman Cliff Stearns of Florida, which allows students to possess life-saving medications for the treatment of asthma and anaphylaxis.
They gather at Asthma Awareness Day on Capitol Hill not just to share stories, but also to call attention to the dramatically increasing incidence of asthma in this country.
Nearly 5,000 people die of asthma every single year. That's about 15 people a day. If 15 people a day were being shot on the front steps of that Capitol, someone would do something about it.
At home, at school, in almost every environment, experts say we are failing to recognize, understand, and treat this potentially fatal illness.
Many patients with asthma are not being properly diagnosed, they're not being properly evaluated, and they're not being properly treated.
Asthma is the chronic inflammation of the airway to the lungs. It is a disease that can be managed, but not cured. This little girl, whose art visually expresses her fear during an attack, didn't think she'd make it.
I couldn't breathe at all. I was like taking the tiniest breath I could ever take because I couldn't make a deep, deep, deep breath, and I was really scared I would die.
It is a complicated disease, manifesting itself in different ways in different people. Increased awareness is key in treating asthma because, overall, the majority of asthma deaths are preventable, allowing asthmatics to grow up like Jim Davis did, a perfect example of how this debilitating disease could instead be a life-defining moment for great achievements. This is Jean LaSquadro reporting.
I'm so glad we're here with Garfield today, the mascot for asthma. Asthma awareness is something we obviously as a nation need to pay more attention to, and I hope that Garfield's work can help us do that in our schools, because clearly we're in an epidemic of asthma around the country, and more children are suffering from it, and in many cases they're not aware of how to best treat asthma. So it's great to have Garfield here to help us bring awareness to asthma and how the fact that it is a manageable disease and that we can do something about it. So we're happy to have Garfield here today.
People with asthma should know that they can live a life without symptoms, and that really should be their aim. That requires the right kind of medical management and also avoiding the environmental triggers of asthma. CDC is working on a number of activities to control asthma. The one that I'd mention as being extremely important is collecting data on what's happening with asthma locally. This is really important to let health departments and people who are going to intervene know where to target the interventions.
I once had to get rushed to the hospital because I couldn't breathe at all. I was like taking the tiniest breath I could ever take because I couldn't make a deep breath. So I had to get rushed to the hospital. They put on this like mask over my face and I stayed there overnight. I felt really scared. I didn't know what was gonna happen. I feared most that I was gonna die, but I didn't know that I would live because I didn't know there was medicine for it. So I was really scared I would die because I've seen these like movies that have masks on and people are like they're in the emergency room and they're dying, and I was afraid I would.